Okay, everyone, I would like to, oh, there's one more. Uh,
Perfect timing.
I would just like to extend my gratitude to you, Casey, for doing this for us. I really appreciate it. We've used your company for almost 2 decades. You guys are spectacular. You're on the ball. You know what you're talking about, and you're also willing to help us with things like this. My clients our buyers have always been incredibly happy with the thoroughness of your inspections, and even if it makes my job harder, it makes my job better because you're getting right down to the incredibly important things and catch things that I think other inspectors honestly do miss. So thank you for doing this for us. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Really happy to be here, and yeah, we definitely take pride in what we do. And I know it definitely makes some real estate agents' lives a little bit harder when we find big, scary stuff, but it's always stuff that people need to know about. So try not to make mountains out of molehills. But yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And yeah, 2 decades feels like a long time, but it is not inaccurate. So
Yeah. Yep. Awesome. Okay, I will just let you take it away. I'll put myself on mute. I am going to put the chat up so that if anyone has a question, they can jump in on that. Uh,
Yeah, and I've got it up on my screen here too. So, yeah, I think, with a class this size, I think people always learn better by jumping in and asking questions. And if you have a funny story about something I'm saying, jump in with that funny story. I think people learn better that way. So definitely don't hesitate to jump in and ask me questions if anybody has any questions or comments or anything like that. Otherwise, yeah, I do have the chat up on my screen, so I will get to your questions as soon as I can. I might finish my thought, but if it ever goes too long and somebody's got a question or whatever in the chat and I don't notice it, it's because it's clear over in this corner. So don't hesitate to stop and say, hey, you got a question in the chat. But I will go ahead and share my screen here. And Zoom always does weird things when I share a screen, so I'm gonna have to fix my screen here real quick. Y'all can see that, right? It says what to expect when you're inspecting.
mhm.
Awesome, cool. All righty, so
Yeah.
um, Marley gave me that wonderful introduction, but a quick 2 seconds on who I am, why I deserve to say a thing or two about home inspections, and why I will blab your ear off because, like Marley said, we've been doing this for 2 decades, so I still have way too much to say about home inspections. I still get geeked up, and so I will find myself talking too fast, or I will go on and on and on. So I'll try to keep this to the about 45 minutes that we promised here. Get everybody out to dinner on time here. But yeah, if you have any questions, always happy to take some extra time for that. But who am I? My name is Casey Larson. Like Marley said, I'm the owner of the Pillar to Post Larson team. We have been serving the Salt Lake Valley for a little over 2 decades now. We started in 2002, so that makes us 23 years old right now. Oh my gosh. Um, I used to say every time I taught one of these classes, you'd never think that I've been doing home inspections for 23 years, but man, it's starting to show, and that's not great. But nobody asks me that question anymore when I'm teaching classes. But no. Long story short, it's a family business. My dad started a business here, like I said, 23 years ago. And I have been working with him pretty much ever since. I was in testing plugs, middle school and high school summers, and after school and weekends and things like that. And really, went off to do my own thing with college and said, you know what, that's a pretty darn good gig. So I came back and I've been working with him or uh, leading the company for a little over 10 years now. So um, long story short, I was NACHI certified at the age of 12. NACHI is the National Association of Certified Home Inspectors. It was a bit of a publicity stunt to try to get some licensing in the state of Utah. You joined us at a lucky class here because just a little over 10 years later, no, a little over 20 years later after that, we are finally seeing licensing passed in the state of Utah. In fact, it passed at the end of March, and we're figuring out what that licensing is going to look like right now. So I'm in charge of a couple of inspector organizations where we're working with the legislature to get that licensing into effect. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But probably the main part of that licensing and the part of licensing in 30 out of the 37 states that do have licensing is the NHIE, the National Home Inspector Exam. I have passed that. And 2 years ago, actually 3 years ago now, I was the Utah Real Estate Inspectors Guild president, just an organization that inspectors get together, do continuing education and things like that. So, yeah, really been around the inspection industry for way too long. I've seen a thing or two, or 12 that I wish I hadn't. And yeah, it still is fun and every day is new and interesting. So, yeah, if you have any just general home or home inspection related questions, I'm always happy to help. I've seen it not just from our side here at Pillar to Post, but from home inspectors all around the industry. I work with a lot of our friends across the country to better things. So moving on, that's way more than enough about me. What do you need to know about the home inspection process? Well, that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. Really, first and foremost, what a home inspection is and isn't. What is checked and what isn't checked. I think that's kind of the main source of any trouble that does arise around a home inspection is just that people don't know what they're getting into. They don't know really necessarily what the benefit they're getting out of a home inspection is. And then some people expect that we are doing different things than we're actually doing, right? So I think, from a homeowner's perspective that we're here to talk about today, there's a ton of great things that you can get out of an inspection. We'll talk about that, but it is also important to know what you'd be spending your money on and what you wouldn't necessarily get out of that, but some people think that they might. So we'll talk a little bit about added testing and services. I teach hour-long classes on most of our added testing and services, so I'm going to do my best to keep that short here today. um, but yeah, there's a lot to talk about as far as radon testing, mold testing, meth testing, that sort of thing. We're going to talk about why you should get a home inspection as a homeowner, not purchasing a home, what to do before and after the inspection, and then last but not least, how to choose an awesome home inspector. As much as I wish you would go with, wrong side, pillar to post here, I also understand that there's a lot of other great home inspectors out there. And again, because there is not currently licensing in the state of Utah, there is a lot of inspectors out there that do great work and a lot that don't do so great work. So we'll kind of talk about how to differentiate between the two. So first and foremost, what is a home inspection? Well, a home inspection is an objective visual examination of the physical structure and systems of a house. That is a very carefully worded sentence. Really kind of two main things that I want to kind of hone in on that sentence. First and foremost, it is objective, meaning I am not there to repair your home. I'm not there to tell you what the value is for the bank or anything like that. My job is literally just to go in and tell you what's going on with that house. And so I have no other motivation other than you have paid me to tell you what's going on with that house. I'm going to tell you what's going on with that house. So something to be careful about. There are home inspectors that also do handyman work, plumbing work, things like that. So good question to ask, but the theory behind home inspection is it's supposed to be objective. I'm not supposed to be selling you any services or anything like that for repairs. So visual is the second word that I wanted to point out there because a lot of people don't realize really we are doing a primarily visual inspection, meaning we can't delve too deep, obviously can't see through walls into the future, all that good stuff. But we also, are limited in what we can access and test. Certainly, we'll open things up like electrical panels, furnace covers, things like that. But doesn't always mean that we can get to everything, especially again behind drywall and we don't have time as we're going through a house to pull every single switch plate off and things like that. But the idea is that it is a medical checkup, right? So we're supposed to be kind of the general practitioners of the home inspection or the home world, right? So if you went to your doctor and said, "Hey doc, my knee hurts," right? If that doctor knows what's going on, they might, test your reflexes or poke and prod a little bit, say, "Oh yeah, there's no swelling and your reflexes work fine. When does it hurt and things like that. But they're probably going to refer you to like a joint specialist at that point. Or if you have a mole on your back, they look at it with a microscope and say, yeah, that looks like it might be cancerous. We're going to send you to a dermatologist, right? So our thing as home inspectors is we say, yeah, this electrical looks unsafe, right? We see this all the time. There's two wires going into one breaker. We're going to recommend that you contact an electrician to take care of it. An electrician is going to say, oh yeah, I can just move this breaker down here and everything's hunky dory. Or they might say, you know what, this breaker, there's no extra room in this panel. We're going to have to add a secondary panel. It's going to get a little bit more complicated. But that's the idea behind it, right? Is simple stuff we can tell you how to take care of. If it starts to get more complicated, we do refer you out to that field. So, and then every inspector is different. Again, especially in the state of Utah where we have no licensing, we do have to be careful about kind of the scope of inspections. I've seen everything from a one-page, three-comment report that said, furnace is this age, roof is this age, and here's a venting issue that I found, to, we've had 110-page reports before, where we're going really in depth into every single room and things like that, and everywhere in between. And if you have an inspector that used to be an electrician, they're going to definitely notice the things that used to, or that, are bigger electrical issues, or maybe more niche electrical issues, but they also might not notice the handrail over here. Like I've got an inspector that's a fireman. He's really careful about smoke detectors and guardrails and things like that. But we trade him up on those other areas, make sure that he knows what he's talking about and can do a great inspection. But yeah, just might not be as good as the electrical stuff as that electrician, right? If that makes sense. So, but yeah, it's important to ask those questions as you're looking into home inspections. What's going to be done here? What is the extent of this? Because a lot of people call a home inspection, you know, home inspection and don't do a ton for your money. So, like Marley said, there is a big difference between, you know, people like us that really go full gamut, and a lot of people in the industry. Um, so what a home inspection isn't, in my opinion, is just as important, like I said, as what a home inspection is. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions because people usually go through the home inspection process when they're purchasing a home, and that ends up being kind of a whirlwind of time. And so, people kind of we joke about it in the industry that like people think about us for about 2 days, right? So the day before they get their home inspection, they think, oh man, I need to get this home inspection. I'm worried what they're going to find. The day after they get their home inspection, they think, oh man, I'm worried about everything that's wrong with this house, or the inspector said this. And then after that, they get their test done, they go through closing, and then we're out of the picture completely. So, it is yeah, not something that people consider very often, right? But people get us confused with other things in that home buying process. So first and foremost, we are not a guarantee or a warranty. That would be a home warranty company. But we're not warranting the roof. We're not saying the roof is going to last for 3 years, and if it fails in year two and a half, you get X amount of dollars or anything like that. There are some home inspection companies that partner with home warranties or with different insurance programs that can get you some of that. But at the end of the day, they're just paying for insurance on they basically betting that your roof isn't going to go out in 2.5 years, right? So it's not a guarantee or a warranty against future conditions. We're inspecting the house as it sits that day, not saying your roof is guaranteed for 3 years, and we'll make sure that it covers past that, right? So again, we can't see through walls, furniture, clutter. We are not movers. So at the end of the day, we can only see what we can see. And so, again, especially as a homeowner, if you're considering getting an inspection done, good to make sure that we can get to everything that we need to get to. We do have in the home buying and selling process a lot of times where the seller will leave the house and it's just chock full and cluttered. And unfortunately, again, we don't have 4 hours to totally clean out the hoarder room in their corner basement bedroom to get to the walls and things like that there, right? So again, it's not an appraisal of value. People get us confused with appraisers a lot. We are not there to tell you how much money the house is worth, or that we found all these issues, so the house is worth less is what a lot of people think it is. that's kind of more up for you to determine how much those issues that we find are likely to cost you. We do have some tools that help with that that we'll talk about later, but it's not a cosmetic inspection, so I can't be there to point out every little scrape and ding in the wall. This is particularly of note on newer construction where people kind of expect things to be a little bit more perfect. Um, yeah, we just again not in our scope, not what we do. We're not there to point out every little scrape. If it's big enough, we certainly will call it out. If somebody's punched a hole in the wall or moved a wall or something like that, then we call it out. But just every little scratch and scrape, that's not really what we're there for. We'll talk more about what we are there for here in a second. But we can't be destructive in any way, so it gives us a little bit more leeway when you're the homeowner standing right there to give us permission, but our insurance still says, we're not doing the repairs, so we can't tear into drywall. You're standing right there, and it's your home. You can tear into the drywall, and we can tell you what you're seeing behind it. But yeah, we can't tear into stuff in a way that it can't be put back together, right? It's not a pass fail. That's the other question that we get all the time, especially when people are buying. Did we pass? Uh, well, it's not pass fail. I'm again just here to tell you, safety concerns, potential money items, and things like that. And you're there to pass it or fail it, or in the case of you guys where your homeowners say, all right, here's what we need to take care of, right? So environmental testing, again, we'll talk about it in a couple of slides here. Every inspector is different. Sometimes they'll bundle it together. Sometimes they'll do, a free radon test to sell their inspection or whatever. But typically there'll be separate things from the inspection itself. So yeah, important to note that as well. So let's talk about what we actually check during an inspection. Well, this is a whole list here. I don't need to read it word for word. You guys can read, but the biggest thing is really we're checking everything that we can reasonably get to that's going to have a major effect on the home. So property site, exterior, roofs, we'll get up into attics, look at structure in attics and basements, crawl spaces, electrical plumbing where we can get to it and see it, HVAC equipment, and then just going through the house, checking faucets, fixtures, bathrooms, kitchens, appliances, um, you know, going through living areas and bedrooms, checking operation of doors and windows, looking for signs of leaks or damage, things like that. Um, and as we're doing that, we're all looking for health, fire, and safety. So, our smoke detectors everywhere that they should be. Do we have, proper fire egress, handrails and guardrails on any drop-offs or stairs? So just kind of doing a general visual inspection of all of that stuff. And again, opening up panels and access wherever we can reasonably to get in and check it further. But kind of a couple of important things to note is typically 99.9% of inspections do not include low voltage wiring. So Ethernet cables, cable TV cables, old school telephone cables, if you still have that wired telephone in your house. Typically, that's not included. One of those things that doesn't necessarily have a huge bearing on most homeowners, and it goes a little bit beyond kind of what we're looking for in a home. It's not a major safety concern or something like that. So, and then every home inspector is different about certain things. Like, we don't do sprinkler inspections. Most inspectors don't do sprinkler inspections with their standard inspection. But then, yeah, some guys have stricter restrictions on getting up in attics and things like that. So important to ask those questions. So what are we going through those areas to look for? Well, first and foremost, our biggest thing is safety concerns. If it's something that's a big safety concern for anybody, whether it be an adult or a child or elderly or toddlers running around, that's kind of the main thing we're looking at. We're looking for damaged items. So if something was in the home that's been damaged, again, if it's anything beyond a little cosmetic damage, then that's what we're calling out. Items requiring repair. So if something's not quite working right, then of course we're calling that out. Items not properly installed. So say there should have been an anti-tip bracket on the stove, and they didn't put that in. Major appliances or materials approaching end of life. So things that, furnaces, water heaters, air conditioners, if they're getting towards the end of that typical life expectancy, that's a bigger cost item coming up, and we're going to want to make sure to point that out, right? Past or present signs of leakage. One of the biggest concerns on any home is water. That's that's the biggest enemy to anything in a house really is water where it's not supposed to be. So we do our best to see any past or present signs of leakage, call that out, and make sure that at least homeowner can keep an eye on it. If it's present, get that leak repaired, right? So and then last but not least, deferred maintenance items and upcoming maintenance items. So, anything that's needing repair or maintenance. So things that need to be painted is a good example. If that wood on the outside, that paint is peeling, most inspectors are going to call that out. Oops, went back here. Sorry. And then upcoming maintenance items. That's kind of the last and most well, not always, not all home inspectors are doing kind of upcoming maintenance items. That's the 11 out of 10 inspectors are kind of calling out things that, hey, just FYI, this is something that's coming up for you. You might want to flush your water heater every year, things like that. But just kind of current and ongoing maintenance items are the last step there. So, last thing I want to talk about here on that home inspection process is it is important to ask how that report and review is going to go because every company is different. Different companies have different preferences. Different people have different preferences. We have found over the last 23 years of doing home inspections. Well, let me back up. There's usually kind of three ways that these companies go about doing reports and reviews. First way is to have the client with them there the whole time. They can walk through, they're seeing everything that we're looking at, how we're checking it and everything. Um, the second option is to meet us at the end and we can show you everything that we found, walk through, show you kind of the bigger concerns, make sure that we list out all our smaller concerns. We can have a conversation about it and see what those bigger items are, especially for you guys as homeowners where you're already in the house. To me, that makes the most sense. Where your water shutoff is in most cases and things like that. So, and then option three, and there are a ton of inspection companies out there that do this. They just show up, do their thing, and email you the report. Sometimes 3 days later, sometimes a week later, sometimes say a day. But so make sure you know what you're getting into when you sign up for an inspection. We have found over the last 23 years, like I said, that really people get real bored with option one. If they're trying to follow us around, we typically take around 3 hours on an inspection on your average home, and they get real bored around minute 45. So just like you guys are about 15 minutes away from right now. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I get real bored around hour 45. They start to wander off. They start to, ask questions and pull our inspector in all sorts of different directions. And it's like, no, we've got a pretty specific, kind of almost checklist, but what I call our flow that we follow. And if we're getting dragged in all sorts of different directions, being asked questions all the time, it can pull an inspector away from something that might be a bigger issue, and then might return back past that. So just something we found to be true over the last few years. But if you want to walk along with one of our inspectors, or most inspection companies will be totally happy with that, and we're happy to do it. Just something to be cognizant of. But it's like those really typically like first time home buyers that are really getting into that. They want to know everything about the house, but especially where you're living in a home, you know where stuff is, right? Generally, typically kind of general maintenance on a home. So yeah, totally recommend just at least walking through the inspector at the end. But the most important thing with that report and review process, no matter which way it's done, is to just ask those questions. We, especially in writing, we have to kind of speak in a way that, if we were to come back and get sued, it's defensible, right? We try to make that as clear as possible. But we have to speak in legalese sometimes, and that's unfortunately just kind of the way the industry is. But typically, we're going to be a lot more forthcoming and can kind of answer those questions and explain things a little bit better in person, verbally. We're typically more than happy to do that. So ask those questions. We don't bite. We expect them. The worst reviews that I ever have with clients are when they're just like, dead silent, nodding along. Like, is this even, are you understanding what I'm saying? That's what I'm here for, is to educate you about this house. So ask those questions that you have that we're, again, barge in with those funny stories. We always love those too. So, So, why should you as a homeowner get an inspection done? Well, we all know there's stuff to do on our houses, right? I have this beautiful background. It looks like I'm in this perfectly clean house. No, you guys know that's not true. My house was built in 1935. So I've got a list like taller than this screen times 10 that I need to do on my house, that I still need to do on my house, and I've owned it for 5 years. I'm checking things slowly off that list, but everybody, whether their house is brand new or older, we know that there's at least a couple things that we want to do to our home to make sure that it's in good shape. Um, we just might not know what to do or really how to prioritize those issues. I think is something that people don't necessarily take into account. And then the biggest thing, in my opinion, is really just deferred maintenance can cost money. Little things that you would barely notice over 5, 10, 15, 20 years can turn into huge issues that cost thousands and thousands of dollars. So my favorite example, because we see it fairly often, is the rain gutter downspout, right? We all have a little drip in the corner on our rain gutters here and there. They never seal them up completely perfectly. Maybe it's a little it's a little full of leaves or whatever, and it's just dripping down. I'll get your question, Leslie, in just one second here. It's dripping down, and this is a great example of one that's dripping down on top of a front porch, right? So that corner of that front porch is just staying wet from that rain gutter dripping, and totally rots out the front porch post here. And it's one of those things that literally could have caulked the corner of that rain gutter, maybe lifted it back up into place. That would have been free 99, or maybe if you're handy, $5 with a caulk gun, or even having a handyman do it would cost 50, $100. Versus this post that's rotted out because that's been dripping in that corner for 10 years is now, you're going to have to get that jacked up, have a new post put in, secured properly at the top and the bottom. If this corner of the deck is rotted, which it probably also is underneath, you're going to have to pull that all out. Ends up being a fine, maybe $10,000 repair. What would have been, $5 or $10, right, 5 or 10 years ago. So it is an important concept. Leslie, you asked, what about a second inspection for a HELOC? I assume you're trying to say. Um, Typically not required on a HELOC. They will have an appraisal done. I know because I just actually recently did a HELOC on my home to pull some equity out. Um, uh, for a few business things actually. But yeah, really, typically they don't require an inspection. They figure you've been living in the house, so it must be at least livable. Not always the case, right? But they do typically require an appraisal, or sometimes they just do desk appraisals depending on how much you're pulling out. But they don't typically require you to get one. Again, not that it's a bad idea, but not typically part of that process. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, let me know. But so yeah, a few other examples of kind of a quick, easy repair versus if the deferred maintenance catches up to you. One of the things that we see all the time is like furnaces. People never service their furnace as often as they should. HVAC manufacturers actually typically recommend cleaning and servicing every year. I think if homeowners did it every 2 to 3 years, we'd see a lot longer life on the average furnace. But I've seen furnaces that clearly haven't been serviced in decades, like as long as we've been working together, Marley and I, right? So um, yeah, I mean, the more it can be serviced, generally the better. A lot of these companies do maintenance programs, but really, furnace service is going to cost you. There are companies out there that say it's $30 or $50. Most of those guys are doing it to get in the door to sell you some other product or find something wrong with your furnace so they can sell you a new one. But even the reputable guys are typically around 100 to 150 bucks. Maybe there's a little repair or whatever that you need to do for another 100 bucks, but you're almost always going to be out the door under 300. Versus if you let that problem fester, that dirty furnace goes out, you're looking at $3,000 to $5,000 for a new furnace. One-time leak, if you got water coming in your basement window or something like that. Again, if it's caught pretty quickly, somebody notices it, and get that dried out, maybe $300 in fan rentals, or maybe replacing a small section of carpet. But if you let it go and go and leak and leak and leak, And you have to get mold remediation done, new carpets throughout the basement. I've seen some ugly, ugly basement walls and especially around windows that it's 10, 15, $20,000 in repairs. So if you can catch that in the short term, it can save you a lot of money in the long term. And then extending rain gutter downspouts. Like I said in the last example, rain gutters can cause a lot of problems, right? One of the most common issues that we see in homes that have major settling problems is just that the rain gutter downspout drains right in the corner, in the yard. All that water pools up and then it saturates the soil in that area, and the whole corner of the house shifts down. And those foundation repairs, not cheap, right? 10, 15, 20. I've heard of 150,000 plus on some bigger homes, but yeah, they're not cheap. Whereas that downspout extension that extends that out in your yard 10 feet costs $10, right? So easy tips and stuff that an inspector can give you that can really help with that stuff in the long run, right? So and then one of the other, like I said, biggest things that we look at is safety concerns. Really, we want to make sure that you're safe living in that home, especially if there's kids running around. One of the most common concerns that we find is electrical safety issues that, like, 9 times out of 10, maybe probably 99 times out of 100, you're never going to notice. But that 99 time out of 100, you're pulling too much through, or that wire just gets to be a little bit too loose. We've got a mismatch breaker that's not making a good connection, a double tap breaker that wire's not making a good connection, and you get overheating, sparking, arcing, fire. It's a big safety concern, right? That's how most of these fires do start, is electrical issues. So very common. Even in newer builds, we see electrical issues all the time. So even those little things can create big problems, right? So leaking or improper venting on gas appliances is another really common one. One of the things that scares me most, I did a condo in West Valley. This was last year, I want to say beginning of last year. Um, Super cute family go knock on the door. It's a basement floor condo. Go knock on the door. The like 10-year-old girl answers the door and it's like, hey, is your dad home? Dad comes to the door. Sorry, I was in a meeting. There's like two little, kids running around the whole time I'm doing this inspection. Last thing I checked, because the dad was doing his meeting at the dining room table right next to where the furnace and water heater closet was. So the last thing I go to check is this water heater, and that water heater vent is completely disconnected up above. This water heater must have just been dumping gas into this house that these guys were living in. And, and I asked him about it. Anytime I see anything that's that big of an immediate safety concern, we certainly let the homeowners know as soon as we can. And I was asking him about it, and he said, "Yeah, I mean, we haven't been in that closet really or done anything in there for years. So how how long has this water heater just been dumping gas into this condo with these kids?" Fortunate that nobody had any major issues from it. I think there wasn't a ton of water usage and things like that, which helps, but still, definitely not something you want to be breathing in all the time at the very least. So um, yeah, loose railing, missing outlet covers, anti-tip brackets, like I said, on stoves, all little safety items that most people wouldn't necessarily even notice if they're not going by wiggling rails like we are, missing outlet covers, in storage rooms and things like that. People don't think about until it becomes a safety issue. So our goal is really partially to help you prioritize, but potentially combine repair costs as a homeowner. I think one of the biggest things is like you might have an electrician come out because you want to replace that light fixture or add an outlet in the corner here or whatever. And while you're doing that, that breaker that was mismatched, that's a big safety issue. It costs you, the breakers themselves are $25. It's a half an hour, if that, of an electrician's time. So while you're already out there paying them $300, you could probably have that breaker swapped out for an extra 50, and save a ton of money versus having that done in two separate trips or, let alone after the fire happens, right? But then, yeah, just not getting hit with larger unexpected costs too. Like, I would venture the vast majority of homeowners have no idea how old their roof is. So if you can get a home inspector up there that says, hey, just FYI, it looks like your roof is getting up there towards the end. You got maybe 3 to 5 years left on it. just FYI, you'll want to start keeping some money set aside for it so that in that 3 to 5 years, you've got a little chunk of change that you can unfortunately spend on the roof and not that new car or whatever it is that you really wanted, right? Um, but it's better that than going out to buy the new car, having no money, being strapped with cash, and then you start leaking through your roof, right? So um, and then, yeah, at least like kind of being aware and kind of nursing some things along, taking precautions where you need. So, the example that I've got here on the slide is, an older water heater that might go out at any time. You've got some money set aside. You don't want to replace the old one still working. This is a good example for me, by the way, because this is exactly what's going on at my house. My water heater is like 25 years old. 20, actually 27 years old now. But yeah, it's like it's still working. It bubbles every once in a while. I know it's going to go out, but I do have a little water alarm right next to my water heater so that when it does go out, it starts leaking. I'm going to hear about it, right? I'm going to hear this loud, high pitched noise that says, hey, come take care of this water heater before, all of my stored belongings in that same room are destroyed or worst case scenario, my walls and my carpet get soaked and it's a big problem. So, um, you can take those precautions like that. And that's a common thing on like lead-based paint or, things like that. So, last but not least, again, we are unbiased. We make no money off your repairs. So again, so many of these companies now, all these big trucks that you see running around, their whole deal is let me in your house to inspect your furnace for 30 bucks. And I'll do a quick tune up for 30 bucks. And then, oh, by the way, we found all these major issues. It's going to be 10 grand for a new furnace. And they mark that up and sell you on repairs that you don't necessarily need. Let me kind of be that first line of defense, at least against that stuff, let you know what you do actually need or might not. If you don't want to get up in your attic or your crawl space, I'm happy to do that. I feel like I'm the first person in people's attics for decades, sometimes. So, and then anytime that you're on a time pressure to buy something, if your furnace went out and it's the middle of winter, it's going to be expensive. You're not going to have time to get multiple people in to get you bids. You have to take care of that time factor. If you can be more on top of those repairs, you can actually save a lot of money in terms of getting multiple bids, getting the cheaper guy to get it done and done right. So Leslie asked again, what are your thoughts on solar and a metal roof? I think solar is great. Big thing with solar is just making sure that the roof that it's installed on is good. Solar systems, they do have a return on investment time period. So, you're outlaying $15,000 or whatever for the solar system, $20,000. You're not going to see that savings back in your electricity bill for typically, around 10 to 15 years. Depends on usage and everything like that. There's some good calculators that you can kind of crunch those numbers, but yeah, I think they're great. The problem really becomes when you put them on an old roof or you're not planning on staying in that house for very long. Because if that solar system, if you put that $20,000 solar system in, you only live in the house for 5 years, then you're not going to see that return, and you've dropped 5 grand into the house. That doesn't add a ton of value to the home. But yeah, if you put it on an old roof and that roof needs to be replaced in 3 to 5 years, and then you've installed solar on top of it, you basically have to install that solar twice, right? You install it, that roof wears out, you got to replace the roof underneath the solar. So you got to pull those panels off, re-roof it, and then reinstall it again. And that can cost a ton of money. So not a great way to go. But yeah, metal roofs, especially solar on a metal roof, it's a great way to go because those metal roofs last 50 to 100 years. I think that they're a great way to go. Again, higher upfront cost. Like it doesn't make sense if you're only going to be in that house for 5 years, 10 years. But if you're going to be in that house for 50 to 100 years, that metal roof might pay for itself 3 or 4 times. So I think they're great ways to go. In terms of longevity, energy efficiency, I like the looks of them. But yeah, I think they're great if you can afford that upfront cost, right? Because that is the downside on really both of those systems. So. Added services to consider. Again, we're running short on time here, so I'm not going to go really into any of these at all. If you have any questions specifically on any of this stuff, let me know. But all of these, I think, are great ideas, especially if you didn't get them done when you bought the house or anything like that. You have any concerns, radon testing, meth testing, mold testing, termite inspections, pest inspections, sewer lateral inspections are huge, especially in older neighborhoods. Those sewer lines between the house and the street degrade, get roots in them, really can cost a lot of money in the long term, cause backups that cost a lot of money in your house. So it's a great way to go. Water quality testing to make sure that your water coming out is great, especially if you're on a well, not a city system. Allergen testing, if you're particularly allergic to anything, lead-based paint testing is never a bad idea in those pre-70s homes. Asbestos testing is not a bad idea, especially if you're doing renovations and things like that. Pool and spa inspections, if you have one. All these are typically going to be ancillary to just a standard home inspection, but never a bad idea. The one that I would recommend the most is radon testing. Radon in general is the second leading cause of lung cancer behind smoking. And we have actually really elevated levels of it here in Utah. About 1 in 5 homes is elevated as far as the national standard goes. About 1 in 3 homes is elevated as far as the worldwide standard, the World Health Organization standard goes. So really can be a bigger concern. Um, as far as new homes, people think, oh, I just got into this home, it's newer, I don't have any issues. They just, city just inspected it, right? Not the case. We do newer construction all of the time and run into pretty significant issues. You'd be surprised at some of the crazy things that we come across on new builds, or relatively new builds. I've seen a brand new home that the roof is leaking through and caused over $10,000 in damage to the upper floor of this brand new house because somebody didn't install a flashing light on the roof surface. Disconnected appliance vents. I've seen that in a brand new home again. Luckily, nobody had moved in yet, but they were having it inspected, saying, "Hey, everything's done and ready to go here," and just no vent at all for the furnace. It was just going off to the corner of the same room that it was in, and that's where it would have been venting. So it would have led to a really bad situation. Yeah, electrical safety hazards all over the place. So not to try to scare the crap out of you, that's not what I'm here for, but there definitely are, some things we do find in these new builds. These subcontractors aren't perfect, getting harder and harder to come by. So what can you do around the inspection process? Well, before you have an inspection done, always be keeping an eye out for those bigger concerns. Again, like I said, I'm the first person to go into people's crawl spaces or attics, or even sometimes just do a lap around their house for years and years in some of these situations. So, if you have a landscaper that always does your yard, when was the last time you went to that far corner by the fence, right? So actually keeping an eye on your house for those bigger concerns, going down in that cold storage room that you never go into, popping, your head up into the attic every once in a while. If you have an inspection done, arrange your schedule so that you can be at the inspection again. In my opinion, you get so much more value by having those verbal conversations with the inspector. They can show you what they're talking about. You can ask those questions. But be aware, no house is perfect. We still, 23 years later, have not inspected a house where we didn't find something wrong. And some homes that not perfect is like there's one door that barely rubs against the frame, or there's one window that's sticky a little bit or whatever. But some homes, it's like I said, 110-page report of all these various things that could use some attention. So yeah, no home is perfect, but generally you probably know about the condition your home is going to come back in. Just as far as the amount of stuff, like, yeah, my 1935 house, I know is very far from perfect. If I were to do an inspection on it still to this day, it'd probably be a 70, 80-page report. But if I was getting into an 800 square foot downtown condo, would not be a lot. Typically, a brand new downtown condo wouldn't be a lot for me to talk about, but there's always something here or there, right? And then it's always a good idea if you do have an inspection done to inform the inspector, so we can pay attention to what you're concerned about. You know the story of the house, especially as a current homeowner, more than we do. We're kind of going in and getting our snapshot, trying to see as much as we can in that time frame. But if you know, hey, there was a leak in this basement corner in 2020, we had it repaired, let us know that so we can look real close to that basement corner, and see if there's something ongoing or some lingering concerns there, right? After the inspection, I hate that I just did this. I added the animation to the slide. It's like my biggest pet peeve, but sometimes PowerPoint does it automatically. After the inspection, review those findings again. I think, unfortunately, especially during the home buying process, again, I get that it's a crazy time, but so many times they'll go through the inspection with the inspector and then never look at that report again. They'll say, okay, I know what's wrong, but even if you can pull that out, 6 months later, a week later, 2 weeks later, people's headspace changes. They read things a little bit differently. That comment that the inspector said that you were distracted looking up at the ceiling, thinking, "Oh, this room would look good in green, right?" um, you know, kind of double checking those things, catching those things. But then, yeah, use that list to kind of prioritize those repairs. Say, hey, yeah, you know what? We did want to add a new back deck this year, but that $20,000 would be better spent on the roof that we're going to need in 1 to 3 years, right? Or we've got $5,000 to do repairs on the house. We could do 2,000 dollars worth of electrical issues, $3,000 for a new, more efficient furnace, and then save the rest for later or whatever. So use it as a checklist too. Again, if it's your report, we typically will print it out. You can mark it up as you choose. Say, yeah, we took care of this. Here's what we did, and that way you can kind of keep mentally, in check what you've done with the house too. So again, ask that inspector if you have any questions. Almost all inspectors that I know are going to be able to keep those reports on file. If you call and say, hey, you know, you called this out on my inspection last year. I'm trying to figure out what's going on with it now. What's the deal here? We're almost always happy to pull that back up, give us 2 minutes to look at it, and we can kind of advise you again. And then, too, it's something that people don't think about a lot is that, as inspectors, I am more than happy to tell you when somebody is saying something they shouldn't say or is trying to pull one over on you. Again, a lot of these companies have kind of sketchy sales tactics that they use to eke as much money as they can out of people. So if you get a bid from somebody that's like, I got one, this was a couple of years ago now. We called out a couple little leaks in faucets and I think we had a toilet that was loose. And the company came out, they had a plumber come out, and the plumber that they recommended gave them a bid for $10,000, right? Because they bid out a whole new shower, the shower surround, new shower, plumbing behind the shower, new toilet, new sinks in the bathrooms, saying, oh, well, if you're going to do this, you might as well do all of it. And that's fine if you want to redo your whole bathroom and spend $10,000 on it. But what it really needed was a new 10-cent rubber seal, or maybe a new cartridge on the faucet on the shower that's, the seal is 10 cents or the cartridge is $50. And then to tighten the toilet down to the floor, so tightening 2 volts. So maybe an hour or two of a plumber's time and, a little bit of equipment here. So, but it's a situation where they were trying to, saw dollar signs in this high-end downtown condo, right? And we're trying to, make some money on that deal. Um, so how do you choose an inspector? Well, if you don't go, I keep going backwards. If you don't go with these guys right here, first and foremost, I recommend that your inspector be a full-time inspector. If you're not full-time or close to, you're just not in the flow of doing things right. So, guys that are doing this day in and day out, we've seen just about all there is to see. We're better at putting those puzzle pieces together. Again, not saying that a part-time guy can't do a great inspection, but what I am saying is when I haven't done an inspection for a couple days, I already feel rusty, right? Monday mornings, I feel a little bit more rusty than I do on Thursday afternoon, right? Not necessarily that dramatic, but if it's been a week, like I have to go back and double and triple check things, make sure I'm not missing stuff. So it is something to consider that the more they're doing it, the more in the swing of things they're going to be, the more they've seen, the more experience they have, right, in general. Again, because we don't have licensing yet in the state of Utah, the best thing that you can do is just double check on their certifications if they belong to a professional organization. So ASHI is the American Society of Home Inspectors. URIG is the Utah Real Estate Inspectors Guild. There's INTERNACHI, which is the International Association of Certified Home Inspectors, all of which certify home inspectors, but have different requirements and different, pros and cons and things like that. So if they're at least doing something to have that continuing education and certification, it's a great way to go. But first and foremost, well, I guess not first, but foremost, right? They should be carrying Arizona emissions insurance. Oh, I guess you guys don't care if it extends to referring realtors, but they should carry Arizona emissions insurance. And then last but not least, how they're presenting the information is important. And I definitely ask that question. How are you going to get this information to me? Because everybody's different on how they do that. But if you're ever unsure, talk to an agent. They work with us a lot, right? Agents have great recommendations, typically because they've seen good and bad. So we're going to go through this real quick. I added this on to the end here because I was hoping that we'd have time to get to it, but as per usual, I talk too much. Last concept that I want to leave you with is that every house does fall into kind of a normal maintenance cycle. So everything wears out, everything has a set lifespan, but they do so at different rates. So a house that's been cared for will kind of settle into what's called a normal maintenance pattern. That typically we should expect to spend about 1% of the home's value per year on maintenance. So for a $500,000 home, that'd be $5,000. And that's not saying you're spending $5,000 every year. That's saying you might spend 1 year, $12,000 on a new roof. And then the next year, just a little bit of touch-up painting here and there. The next year, you got to buy a new furnace. Next year, a little more touch-up painting. The next year, you got to buy a new air conditioner. So that kind of rolls in together to typically be about 1% of the home's value. And it does scale up and down pretty well. A little $300,000 condo, there still is going to be some maintenance, but most of that's taken care of by the HOA. And then on a $3 million mansion, everything costs more money, right? So, but there is deferred maintenance. That is a real thing, right? Maintenance that hasn't been done, and those issues snowball and start to cause problems. So that's when catching up can get expensive. But yeah, got some common life expectancies here for you. Feel free to grab your phone and snap a picture of that slide. But some common ages of how long these materials are expected to last. Give you kind of a good idea here. Just an FYI on these tankless water heaters, they are meant to last 10 to 20 years. The big key is maintenance. People get them, they don't do maintenance. They say they're terrible. If you do that maintenance, they're fantastic. So we've got some funny pictures here, some not so funny pictures to end us off. This one, I actually revamped these few slides from when I usually teach this class to include pictures only from the last month that I have been sent by my inspectors. So this is a brand new water heater, a year and a half old. And there's all of this corrosion here on this valve and pipe connecting to the water heater. This is because this water heater is not venting properly, and it's forcing those exhaust gases back down and into or onto, I should say, that pipe connecting it. So it's the corrosive gases in that exhaust gas are what's corroding that quickly. So kind of crazy. Again, year and a half old water heater. This was today. My inspector sent me this photo of the neighbor's house. And just an FYI, I'm not saying this is commonplace, but I have seen this on a home that was for sale. The whole front of the house was reshingled. The whole side that you could see from the driveway was reshingled. The whole side of the garage that you could see from the yard was reshingled. But the side of the house that you couldn't see from your yard and the side of the garage that you couldn't see from your yard looked almost exactly like this. So this is why doing a walk around on your house every once in a while is good. Getting an inspection done is good. Because those shingles are real rough. And then this was a couple weeks ago. My inspector sent this over on a deck that he was inspecting, starting to pull away from the house. This deck's got that much space right before it falls off of that ledge and really starts to hurt somebody. So again, good situations to get an inspection done and get that double checked. And last but not least, I love electricians. They're great, but man, they're not good at spelling. We got the frigid plugged in over there on that breaker. The furnace, that might be my favorite that I've ever seen, but yeah, not great spellers. So I appreciate you guys bearing with me. Went a couple minutes longer than I'd hoped here anyway, but Yeah, I think, some valuable information in there. I really think even for, existing homeowners, a home inspection will typically save you money based on some of the repairs and stuff that you have to do in the long run. Being able to get on top of that stuff can go such a long way. So, really happy to help, and I will be more than happy to stick around if anybody has any questions. Now is the time. Otherwise, hopefully, I don't know if Marley put my info in the slide for the class or anything, but I'm always happy to answer any questions that you have, whether I do an inspection for you or not. Give me a call if you're like, hey, what the heck is going on with this on my house? Let me know. I'm always happy to be a resource for you guys. So yeah, don't hesitate to do that either. So thanks again.
This is
Any questions, I should say?
wonderful. I don't have any questions. Leslie, Evan, JD, anyone?
Just want to say thank you for your time, sir.
No problem at all. Yeah, thanks for coming, guys.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, Casey. And of course, I will be seeing you periodically, as always.
Absolutely, yeah, sounds great. And yeah, again, happy to be a resource for anybody on this call or otherwise. So don't hesitate to reach out. Don't be a stranger.